Time to learn about the nervous system. Your learning targets are that basically you're gathering and synthesizing information about sensory receptors and how they respond to stimuli by sending messages to the brain for immediate behavior or to be stored as memories. You guys got familiar with these words yesterday, sensory receptors and stimuli, but you'll hear more about that today. You might also think about just some of the cross-cutting concepts, like how does the structure of the nervous system help facilitate its function or jobs? And then also think about cause and effect and the relationship that that has within the nervous system. Your basic directions are to fill in your chart, which is going to get glued in on page 117. You're watching some video clips and you're filling in some sections of your notes. It's going to require a little bit more writing than what you have done in the past, so make sure you are following along. We're going to start with a clip by Tim and Moby. Brain prop.
Dear Tim and Moby, why do we feel hot and cold? From Jonathan. Ow! Jonathan, you can feel things like hot and cold, soft and sharp edges, and being poked in the head because of your nervous system. The nervous system is the control center for your entire body. It's made up of your brain, your spinal cord, and a huge network of nerves. Your brain uses information it receives from your nerves to coordinate all of your actions and reactions. Without it, you'd be in big trouble. Your brain contains an intricate network of nerve cells or neurons that carry messages back and forth. Kind of like telephone wires. When you touch something, a neuron is stimulated. That neuron generates a tiny electrical impulse. This impulse travels the full length of the neuron. When it gets to the end, it needs help getting across the gap to the next neuron. That's where chemicals called neurotransmitters jump in. The electrical pulse in the first cell releases chemicals that carry that impulse to the next cell. The signal travels through the network to your brain. You don't have to touch something to put the nervous system to work. It's up and running all the time. The nervous system actually works in two ways. The autonomic nervous system handles all the things that seem to happen on their own, like your heart beating. The somatic nervous system controls voluntary actions like talking or petting your cat. When you touch something hot, it triggers a reflex action that happens without your brain's help. Neurons signal the spinal cord with a pain message. The spinal cord reacts quickly by having muscles in your finger contract and pull away. Some parts of the skin have more receptors than others. That's why your tongue is more heat sensitive than, say, your heel. Stop poking me! Moby was testing my nervous system. Look, Moby, I can't turn off my nervous system like you can. Huh. See? Your nervous system is important.
So let's recap. What are the parts of the nervous system? Well, definitely neurons. We think about how body systems are built, and the smallest unit of any living thing is a cell. So the cells that build the nervous system are called neurons, and they have this very distinctive shape, which you guys got to see in the animal tissue lab not too long ago. We'll talk more about them in a second. And then, of course, you have your brain, which is sort of the coordinator of all the other parts, your spinal cord, and then all of your sensory organs. More on these to come. So next on your list is just to tell the difference between the central and the peripheral nervous system. So what are those differences? Well, central, just like the name sounds, is made up of the central part of your body, really, your nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord. And your peripheral nervous system is your outside nervous system. Peripheral actually means the periphery is the outside of something. So anything, all of your nerves, all of your sense organs belong to this part of your peripheral nervous system. So you have sensory nerves pretty much all over your body, but they are definitely clustered in your sense organs. Neurons, again, you guys have seen these in lab when we looked at nervous tissue in our animal tissue lab. But let's talk a minute about how does an individual neuron work. So we have, well, basically three parts to a nerve cell. there is the main cell body, which has all the parts of the cell that you guys learned about. You can see the nucleus right there, but it would have all the other organelles you learned about. And then on the outside of that, we have all of these extensions, which are called dendrites. And dendrites are what are receiving all the incoming messages from around the neuron. And then around, on one side of the neuron is this long extension called the axon. And it's this direction that the message is carried. So the message is received over here, and then it's pushed along the axon until it hits the next neuron. So the signal enters at the dendrites, the signal's carried away through the axon. And you may notice too, these little cells here that surround the axon called Schwann cells, those are named after Theodor Schwann, who was one of the contributors of the cell theory. He said, hey, all animals are made of cells. The other thing just to note about neurons and these axons here, these myelin is sort of like a coating around your axon. And every time you practice doing something, you add to what's considered this myelin sheath. And so your reaction times get better. So this is one way that your nervous system improves, or your brain learns or grows over time by practicing passing messages along that axon.
All right, how's that? Dear Tim and Moby, what are neurons? From James L. Neurons, or nerve cells, are the specialized cells that make up your nervous system. The nervous system is the control center for your entire body. It's made up of your brain, your spinal cord, and a huge network of neurons all over your body. These control all your movements, senses, thoughts, and feelings. Everything from walking around to feeling pain to remembering your phone number is handled by the neurons in your nervous system. Yep, it controls that. Yep, that too. Hey, are you gonna let me do this? If you looked at a neuron, you'd probably notice that it looks kind of different from the cells you're used to seeing. That's because neurons have extensions called processes that emerge out from the cell's body, or soma. These processes are super important. They transmit messages throughout your whole nervous system. Well, yeah, they sort of work like electrical wires. Neurons carry electric signals called impulses from one part of your body to another. That's why they need to be so much longer than other kinds of cells. In complex animals, like people, neurons can have two kinds of processes. Dendrites receive impulses passed along from other neurons, and axons carry impulses away from the cell body. Most axons are covered in a white, fatty substance called myelin that speeds up transmission, sometimes as much as 90 meters per second. That's important because sometimes you need to feel things fast. Ah. Even though a signal may have to travel a couple of meters to get to your brain, it still happens in a fraction of a second. An axon connects with other neurons at a fluid-filled gap called a synapse. When an impulse reaches an axon's terminal, chemicals called neurotransmitters are released into the synapse. The neurotransmitters pass through the synapse to stimulate other neurons, which carry the message along to the rest of your body. Not all synapses are between two nerve cells, though. Well, say you want to move your hand. In that case, nerve impulses travel from your brain to the muscles in your hand. Neurotransmitters are released in the synapses between neurons and muscle cells, telling the muscles to contract. Well, right, not all neurons do exactly the same thing. Sensory neurons transmit signals from sense organs, like eyes, ears, and skin, up to the spinal cord or brain. Motor neurons transmit signals from your central nervous system to your muscles, telling them to move. And interneurons are kind of like messengers. They transmit signals between sensory and motor neurons. But all neurons really have the same job, carrying information from one part of your body to another. have an artificial neural net of positronic relays that only simulate the thoughts and feelings of a living organism. No, you only feel alive. You're actually no more alive than this lamp. The end. I'm just messing with you.
Now we're going to move into sensory receptors in the body, and there's 5 of them, so you have 5 spaces on your table. And we're going to start with the chemical receptors in your body that detect chemicals. So these are found on your tongue. They respond to food and drink that you put into your body. Just to go into a little bit more detail, you have these little patches on your tongue called papillae, and they come in sort of different kinds. And those papillae are the chemical receptors. So you've basically a little pore that comes down in here, and some different kinds of cells that receive that chemical and then basically pass that message down this afferent nerve, a sensory nerve, which then carries it along to the brain. And generally, with taste, you form some information from that. It's considered making a memory. Moving on to another kind of sensory receptor in the body, your retina, your rods and cones, which are the cells on the back of your retina. The retina is the back of your eyeball that are sensitive to light. Technically, rods and cones have different jobs. Rods let you see in black and white, cones let you see in color. But basically, light passes here through your pupil and hits the back of the retina, and then you have a nerve back here, your optic nerve, back here, that then takes that signal and passes it to the brain, and your brain interprets it or causes you to store information from it. We also have olfactory cells, which are in your nose. So you can see on the picture here, there are scent, S-C-E-N-T, molecules that get released into the air from different substances. Here they're talking about a flower. And those molecules go into your nose where there is sensitive cells called olfactory receptor cells. Anytime you see this word olfactory, it's having to do with smelling. And those cells pick up or bind to those scent molecules right here, and then send a message off to the brain. And then you make a memory from that or store information from that. You also have a similar thing going on in your ear, auditory sense receptors. So you guys will learn more about waves and sound in 8th grade next year, but sounds basically travel as waves, and they are collected, or the part of your body that's receptive to them is in your ear. And we have a tympanic membrane, just like we saw in the frog. If you guys recall, that was that circle-y thing behind the frog's eye. And that, when it hits those sound waves, starts vibrating. And your auditory nerve doesn't really show that in here, but there is nerve cells in here receptive to that, and then that information gets sent to the brain. And again, you form a memory from that, or you respond appropriately to that message. Okay, and your last sensory receptor is touch, and you have different kinds of touch receptors in your skin. Some of them sense hot or cold. There's some that just senses touch or pressure. This one's also pressure. And then something that senses pain. And then your sensory receptors distinguish between those things, send that message to the spinal cord or brain, and then you react appropriately. So now you're going to watch another brain pop on the brain, and I want you to try to write down several things, big ideas about the brain here. So aim for 3 to 4 things as you watch.
Look, a letter. Dear Tim and Moby, a nature show on TV said that dolphins have bigger brains than humans. Does that mean dolphins are smarter than people? From Ethan. P.S. Does Moby have a brain? Well, yeah, but he keeps it in a jar. It's true that some kinds of dolphins have larger brains than humans, but that doesn't necessarily make them smarter. Scientists think that intelligence is more about the complexity of your brain than its size. And the human brain is more complex than any other animal's. Its billions of nerve cells allow you to think, remember, dream, see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. Yeah, pretty much everything you think of as yourself, from the foods you like to being good at math, is contained inside your brain. It even controls stuff you don't have to think about, like keeping your heart beating. All that work takes a lot of energy. Even though your brain weighs only 3 pounds, it uses up to 20% of the oxygen you breathe. Well, different areas of the brain do different things. There are 3 major parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. The cerebrum, where you think, is the biggest part of the brain, and the part that most people are familiar with, a twisty mass of gray matter. It's divided into 2 halves called hemispheres. Within each hemisphere, different areas or lobes take care of different kinds of thought. Well, like the frontal lobe is where planning, problem solving, and speech happen, and the temporal lobes are associated with memories. In many people, the 2 hemispheres are specialized to perform certain tasks. For example, language and math skills are often controlled by the left brain, while the right brain controls creative tasks. Underneath the gray matter is the limbic system, where your emotions begin. It also contains the thalamus, which is like the brain's switchboard, passing information from your body to the correct part of the brain. And the hypothalamus, which controls your body temperature and food intake. Without the hypothalamus, you'd keep eating and never feel full. More. The hypothalamus plays a major role in the endocrine system, in which chemicals, called hormones, regulate a lot of your body's natural processes. The cerebellum, located underneath and to the rear of the cerebrum, coordinates your body's movements. Whoa! Then there's the brainstem. It monitors and controls all the little automatic functions that keep you alive: your heartbeat, your breathing, your blood pressure, and whatnot. I know it's a ton of information, Moby, but the brain does a lot of work. If you didn't have a brain, you'd be dead. Oh, right, dolphins. Now that we know a little more about the brain, you can understand why it's hard to compare dolphin intelligence to human intelligence. Dolphin brains are bigger, but the parts of their brain where conscious thinking occurs are very small. So I don't think you'll be seeing dolphins in school with you anytime soon.
Also, reflexes are an important part of the nervous system. So pause the video and see if you can go ahead and explain how a reflex works. Even better if you can use words like motor, sensory, or relay neurons. By the way, this label got pushed over to this part, but the spinal cord is this part of the diagram. This diagram's a little weird in that it's a very simplified version of your nervous system. You have your spinal cord, you have a muscle, you have your hand in this case. So see if you can explain how those things would function together. Hopefully you said something like this. A sensory neuron in the finger, so over here, the receptor in the skin would be a sensory neuron, is going to be first to detect a message. And in this case, the stimulus is the hot pizza. So that sensory neuron is then going to, let me just erase for a second, is going to send a message through the arm. It's going to go to the spinal cord. And the relay neuron will then take the message back the other direction to the muscle, which has what are called motor neurons. And motor neurons are what activate that muscle to move, and this arm gets pulled back immediately from the hot pizza. It happens within a split second. You don't even have to think about reflexes. They happen automatically. I'm going to write that, running out of space. Here's a nice GIF that shows that process that we just described. You've got a picture here as well that just kind of shows the direction of the signals and the different kinds of neurons that are involved. So the stimulus is here with the hot flame. The sensory neuron sends the message out to the spinal cord. The spinal cord sends a relay for the relay neuron back to the muscle, and the motor neuron right there then pulls that muscle back immediately. It happens within a split second. Okay, so based on what you've seen, let's think about explaining the difference between what's an immediate response and something that's a stored memory. So an immediate response is something that happens immediately within a split second. It's something you don't think about. It just happens. Whereas a stored memory is something that it's just information that your brain then categorizes and refers back to later on. So some examples of each one. Any kind of reflex would be an immediate response, like pupil dilation or touching something hot and pulling your hand back. There's a knee-jerk reflex that you can trigger. And then on the other side of things, a stored memory is just usually referring to your sensory organs, but smells or sounds or tastes, sometimes feelings that you get associated with all those different kinds of stimuli. A certain visual, a certain smell or scent or sound. And your brain pulls and references that information later on.